We've been training for those type of events, and we had never been deployed prior to 9/11. That was our first deployment as a team, and probably the biggest one we'll ever be involved with.
I remember the news saying they thought at first it was a private plane, and I thought that's an awful lot of damage for a small Cessna. And then, they started talking that it was a passenger jet. And for some reason, my immediate reaction, I actually did think terrorism.
On our way there, as we were kind of passing some of the different rest stops, you could kind of see the price of gas and things all of a sudden going up. They were taking a huge spike. But I also remember being very aware that what we were responding to was going to be historic.
It was a sobering moment, to say the least. I'm sure every person had a moment of questioning, boy, am I ready for this? Are we ready for this? Will we perform? Will we let our brothers and sister first responders down?
We knew, obviously, that the planes had struck the towers, they had fallen, that there were numerous firefighters, police officers, EMS personnel missing.
I had, on one hand, no idea what I was looking at or what it was like before September 11th. Some people have told me that might have made it a little easier.
I remember just thinking, I was just like actually ducking, looking outside the window like, geez, we're under attack here. And of course the media was, well, we don't know what's going on, we're not sure. And I'm like, not sure? We're under attack, people. This is crazy. This doesn't happen in the United States.
I would say every generation has a day that they will never forget. For some people it would be December 7th, 1941. For others it would be the assassination of President Kennedy or Martin Luther King. For my generation, I believe it will always be September 11th, 2001.
I was meeting in Columbus that day at the State Emergency Operations Center with other first responders discussing State of Ohio's preparedness for catastrophic events.
And I was on my way to that meeting when we got notified by radio that the World Trade Center had been hit. I returned to the station, anticipating being deployed with the Urban Search and Rescue Team.
We were sent back to Dayton. I received the notification that we were going to be deployed while I was en route to Dayton, and we deployed out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that afternoon.
But I remember at first I was very angry that someone had come to our soil and immediately killed hundreds, if not thousands of people just with the first plane.
I had friends call me shortly thereafter and say, do you think this will involve you? And even after the first tower went down, I said, clearly not. This is New York City. They have never in their history used any outside resource. They won't need us. About 2 hours later, we got called.
As a firefighter and a police officer, you want to help. That's your job. You help people. And you felt so helpless sitting there on the coffee table with your dog in front of you, and there's nothing you can do until the towers collapsed. And as soon as the towers collapsed, I looked at my dog Gondo and I said, we're going to New York City.
As our convoy crossed the George Washington Bridge heading into Lower Manhattan for the very first time, off in the distance we could see the column of smoke from the World Trade Center fires that were burning.
You couldn't see ground zero, as they called it. You literally couldn't see any of the collapse. You could see like some peripheral damage on some of the tall buildings, but the buildings were so high and so big that you literally couldn't see the actual pile.
For several blocks, and a several block radius out from ground zero, there was literally miles of fire hose just left abandoned. And then you started seeing the fire apparatus.
As we rounded the corner, the very first thing I saw was this tactical unit from the FDNY. And it was upside down and had been ripped in half. I think my immediate thought was, what rips a fire truck in half?
They were unattended, they were damaged, covered in debris. And it hit me, and it hit everyone, that the men and women who had staffed that fire apparatus were no longer able to do so, that they were missing or killed.
I'll never forget that image of that fire truck and then just those guys, and you could tell that they were already, worn to the bone. And I remember thinking at that very moment that I will stay here for as long as it takes.
Ohio Task Force 1 was staged at a Chase Manhattan Bank off of Liberty Street, and that was our forward BOO, or base of operations. Our main BOO, and where we slept and rehabbed, was at the Javits Center, and we worked 12-hour shifts. I was in charge of the night shift, and we would come out. We would move by bus from the Javits to the Chase Manhattan Bank on Lower Manhattan, then we would cross. From there, we would walk into the World Trade Center Plaza.
My job as medical team manager was to primarily take care of the task force members, make sure that they were fit for the deployment, and making sure that they remained fit, both physically and to the extent possible mentally.
My role at Ground Zero was a tech search specialist. The primary job, at least at this event, was to use audiovisual equipment, search cameras of all sorts, listening devices. One's called a DELSAR. It's able to pick up even the most minute sounds of people who are trapped in concrete, steel, rubble of any kind.
The environment was very dusty, very dirty, very loud. There was, as the scene developed, there became more and more layers of security. And I think at one time we were passing through 3 and 4 perimeters set up by the military for security checks.
The search camera, I remember that we used them so much that we burnt the drive motors in them. And we got to the point where we were just manually moving the camera eye as we would stick it into small holes to see if we could find victims.
My job was to work with the FDNY command structure to provide rescue support to them. So as their firefighters were searching through debris, if they found a opening to access underground areas, or if there needed to be high-rise searches on buildings that were damaged, any of the specialized searches we would do, but we would do them in conjunction with FDNY command structures.
My other responsibilities included taking care of victims that we would encounter. And certainly in this situation, I had hoped that would be the case, that we would find live victims, that we would find people entombed inside the rubble that we would be able to care for as we were extricating them. Obviously that never happened. The other responsibility that I actually had was to help take care of the Task Force K-9.
As a dog handler, our mission was to find those that may be still viable in the collapse or in the disaster. The dogs are trained to find the odor of live human scent, and they indicate that by barking at the source of where that scent is.
I work, obviously, cadaver dogs, human remains detection, and basically I was assigned a group of firefighters, and there was like an officer in charge, and the dog would search an area, and then he would indicate on different areas. The firefighters would go in and flag those areas or recover the parts, the pieces, and then heavy equipment, huge heavy equipment, would come in and basically skim off a layer, and then we'd go back again and we'd do the same thing, and we just continued to do that.
Everyone's seen pictures of that long line of rescuers, handing debris from one to the next as we were going through it, and hoping that you were going to move a rock or something and find somebody there.
When the collapse occurred, it created a lot of void spaces that were unsafe areas. So while you had people on top of a debris pile picking apart just small pieces of debris and moving them out with buckets and things like that, every time they moved something, they would potentially access an opening that may go 40, 50 feet down, and then over to a steam tunnel that then led to a parking garage that then led to something else. And those were areas that there's just no way on earth to make sure that you've checked them out and searched them. So anytime that opportunity was created by moving debris, then there was a hole. It has not been searched. We need to send the rescuers down. So that's when my team would get involved.
When the dogs would come off the pile, as it was known, they would flush their eyes out with saline. They would listen to their hearts and lungs to make sure everything was functioning right. Whatever was in the World Trade Center is essentially what you're going through, whether it is rubbled concrete, rebar, broken glass. The dogs have to be trained to a point to kind of ignore the pain a little bit.
And it was a hazard for the dog. And Gondo, my dog, was a clumsy dog. And I knew his limitations working a disaster like that. And he couldn't go up high up like you saw a lot of the dogs go high up on the piles. He was more of a ground level, small pile kind of dog. And he did good, but we had to be careful. But there was nothing recognizable there at all.
When we first arrived, we were still hoping and thinking that we were part of a rescue operation.
During our entire deployment at the World Trade Center, we were in rescue mode. In that changes a little bit of what our risk-benefit modeling is as we take on missions and assignments. We take it for granted that we're going after someone that's alive.
You hear about tornadoes, earthquakes, where people are rescued, found, discovered days after the initial event.
We were always hoping that we'd find a void space that had live victims in it, because that's where, in a collapse like this, that's where you find your most savable people, in those void spaces. And that, in fact, the people that did survive the collapse were found in void spaces.
So we were in rescue mode the entire time, working very aggressively with our tactics to gain clues to people's possible whereabouts, and then to gain access to that location and to extricate them safely.
The physical destruction was one thing, but the toll on human life was clearly the most disturbing. It became very evident within a few days that death was all around us.
I remember this young girl, she had like a handful of pamphlets, and it was a picture of her, I think her brother, and we're talking 15, 16 years old. And I remember she came from behind me, and I didn't see her coming up, and she grabbed my shirt sleeve, and she stopped me basically in my tracks, and she said, "Have you seen this person?" And I said, "No, I haven't." She says, "Well, if you find him, will you please call this phone number?"
There was departments and agencies from all across the country, and most of us had driven there because of the no-fly. And it was like, we're not going to find anyone. And that was a really difficult thing to accept.
I would say that I got discouraged in not finding people in the initial 24 to 48, 72 hours. What I did become, I think, is more determined, because I think it was just an automatic recognition that we weren't going to find very many live people.
Like so many search operations that become recovery operations, at that point in time, we were thinking about the families of those that were still missing, and we wanted so badly to find something so that those families could have some measure of closure.
My whole goal of working a cadaver dog, like I said, is, I just want to bring closure to the families. I think that is so important. I've lost family members of my own, and I can't imagine what it would be like to not have them to bury, and to not know what happened to them.
It was disappointing not to rescue anybody. In general, it's disappointing that there weren't more survivors from the World Trade Center. And it's just like I tell my children, you live without regret. You go in and you know that you've worked just as hard as you could work, that you applied every bit of your knowledge, skills, and ability to successfully rescue somebody. And if it didn't work out that way, then put yourself in a position and your team in the position to know that it wasn't because you didn't work hard and worked to the best of your professional level.
I guess the big thing is I don't want people to forget this was a major, major impact on our generation and generations to come in terms of how we prepare for events like this. I think it changed all facets of the way we live, and I don't want people to forget that that can happen from a single incident.
When I talk with people, I look at them and I say that I was lucky enough to be able to go and take part in it. And they kind of look at me like, you know, they don't understand that. And I usually have to explain a little bit that when I say I was lucky enough, I got to do what almost every man and woman in this country wished that they could do. I got to go and I got to help.
Ohio is still an integral player in whether it's, in this particular case, in the emergency response, the task force and so forth. They've been very proactive in developing those resources, those specialties in response to whether, in this particular case, disasters, so that when we did have things like the Xenia tornadoes, that we can respond to those things very quickly and efficiently, saving human life.
The citizens of Ohio should be very proud of the men and women in the fire service and the EMS service and law enforcement in this state, because we are so ready and willing and able to respond literally at a moment's notice, not only in our own community, in our own state, but also in neighboring states and in some cases across the country.